Nestled in the rolling hills of the Midwest, Ridgewood was the kind of town where time seemed to stand still. With its single main street lined with mom-and-pop stores and a town square that hosted seasonal festivals, Ridgewood thrived on its small-town charm. The townsfolk prided themselves on knowing their neighbors by name, exchanging warm smiles in passing, and leaving their doors unlocked at night. To most, it was a safe haven, untouched by the troubles of the outside world. Sheriff Caleb Morrow had spent his entire career ensuring Ridgewood lived up to its reputation. A man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a weathered face, Caleb had seen his share of minor disturbances, petty thefts, the occasional bar fight, and the rare runaway teenager. But he was more than just an enforcer of the law. He was a father figure to many and a protector of all. People trusted him because he cared, and his deep connection to the community meant every case, no matter how small, carried personal weight. But nothing in his years of service had prepared him for the call he received that gray November morning. It was the kind of call that marked the end of innocence for a town. Welcome to my channel. This is True Crime and Life Stories channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you are new to this channel, please click on notification button to get notified anytime we upload a new video. The victims were Natalie Carter, a widowed mother in her mid-30s, and her two daughters, Emily, age 10, and Sophie, age 6. Their home, a modest two-story house on the outskirts of town, was now a sealed crime scene. Caleb arrived to find the usually quiet neighborhood buzzing with patrol cars, a coroner's van, and horrified onlookers whispering amongst themselves. The air was thick with a grim silence that seemed to press down on everyone. Inside the house, the scene was a stark contrast to Ridgewood's idyllic image. The living room was eerily tidy, save for a shattered porcelain vase near the doorway. In the dining room, chairs were askew, as if someone had left in a hurry or struggled. The most unsettling detail was the old grandfather clock against the wall. Its glass face was cracked, and the hands were frozen at 11:17. The bodies were discovered upstairs in the master bedroom. Natalie and her daughters lay lifeless, their positions suggesting a cruel and calculated act. Emily and Sophie clutched their favorite stuffed animals, a heartbreaking detail that spoke to their innocence. Caleb felt the familiar weight of grief settle over him as he stared at the lifeless forms. He had known Natalie since high school, remembered her as the bright and ambitious girl who always had a kind word for everyone. He had watched her daughters grow, seen them at town parades and school events. The sight of their lives cut so brutally short shook him to his core. The initial investigation offered little solace. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting the killer was either someone Natalie trusted or someone skilled at avoiding detection. A faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the house, though Natalie was known to despise smoking. The neighbors reported hearing nothing out of the ordinary, adding to the unsettling nature of the crime. As Caleb stepped outside to collect his thoughts, he met the somber gazes of the townspeople gathered at the edge of the crime scene tape. Their faces held a mix of fear and desperation, silently pleading for answers. For Caleb, this was no longer just a case. It was a betrayal of everything Ridgewood stood for. With the weight of the town's trust on his shoulders and the haunting images of Natalie and her daughters etched into his memory, Caleb vowed to uncover the truth. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of a case that would challenge everything he believed about his quiet town and himself. The morning after the murders, Sheriff Caleb Morrow returned to the Carter home, determined to sift through the horror for answers. The air was crisp, the kind that chilled the skin and made breath visible, as though the town itself was mourning. Crime scene tape fluttered faintly in the wind, and a uniformed deputy nodded solemnly as Caleb stepped inside. The forensic team worked methodically, snapping photographs and collecting evidence. Caleb greeted Doctor, Eleanor Vance, Ridgewood's seasoned medical examiner who had spent the night examining the victims. Her weary eyes and grim expression spoke volumes. Preliminary findings suggest the time of death was between 11 p.m. and midnight, she said, her voice steady but subdued. The mother and older daughter sustained blunt force trauma to the head, likely from the same object, something heavy but smooth, like a tire iron. The younger girl, Eleanor hesitated, her professional composure briefly cracking. She was strangled, likely by hand. Caleb nodded, his jaw tightening. Any signs of struggle? Defensive wounds? Minimal, Eleanor replied. Whoever did this took them by surprise. No signs of forced entry either. They likely knew their killer. This fact didn't sit well with Caleb. Natalie Carter was cautious, especially after losing her husband 2 years ago in a car accident. She wouldn't have let just anyone into her home late at night. As Eleanor returned to her work, Caleb moved through the house, scrutinizing every detail. He paused in the living room, where the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered. Neither Natalie nor her daughters smoked, and Caleb couldn't recall a single visitor ever lighting up in her home. The source of the smell remained elusive, adding another layer of mystery. In the dining room, Caleb noticed a few chairs pushed back from the table, as though an argument had taken place. A broken vase near the doorway had been partially swept into a corner, suggesting someone had tried to clean up or conceal a disturbance. Upstairs, the bedrooms were relatively undisturbed, except for the master bedroom where the bodies had been found. It was in Natalie's closet that Caleb discovered something intriguing. Behind a row of neatly hung dresses, he found a small metal box filled with letters. The handwriting on the envelopes varied, but one letter in particular caught his eye. It was unsigned, but the tone was angry and accusatory, with phrases like, "You can't just shut me out," and "This isn't over." The date on the letter was 3 weeks prior. Another oddity caught his attention, a missing photo frame. Natalie's bedside table displayed several family pictures, but there was a noticeable gap where one should have been. Caleb made a mental note to ask Natalie's relatives if they knew which photo had been there, and why someone might have taken it. Later that afternoon, Caleb began canvassing the neighborhood. Ridgewood's tight-knit community meant word of the murders had spread like wildfire, and residents were eager to share what they knew, no matter how insignificant it seemed. "I saw a car parked across the street that night," said Mr. Benson, the elderly man who lived 2 doors down from the Carters. "Dark sedan, maybe black or navy blue. Didn't recognize it." "Could you see who was inside?" Caleb asked. Mr. Benson shook his head. "Not clearly. It was late, and the streetlight barely reaches that far." Another neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, mentioned hearing muffled voices and what sounded like arguing around 11 p.m. "It didn't last long," she said. "I thought maybe it was Natalie and one of the girls having a spat, but now—" She trailed off, her voice trembling. The most compelling information came from a younger neighbor, Tricia Lopez, who lived directly across the street. "I saw Natalie arguing with a man on her porch 3 days ago," she said. "He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-30s. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Natalie looked upset. He left after a few minutes, got into a dark car, and drove off." "Do you recognize him?" Caleb asked, his heart quickening. Tricia shook her head. "Never seen him before, but—" She hesitated. "He was smoking. Tossed a cigarette into the yard before he left." This revelation sent Caleb back to the Carter house. He instructed his deputies to search the yard for cigarette butts, hoping they might find one overlooked in the initial sweep. Sure enough, near the edge of the driveway, a deputy found a partially crushed cigarette butt. Caleb bagged it himself, knowing it could hold vital DNA evidence. Despite these promising leads, the case remained frustratingly murky. The dark sedan, the angry letter, and the missing photo all hinted at a personal motive, but none of the neighbors could identify the man Tricia described. Natalie's family and close friends were equally baffled, insisting she had no recent romantic entanglements or known enemies. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb sat in his office, reviewing the day's findings. His notepad was filled with questions and half-formed theories, but the picture remained incomplete. Whoever had done this had planned carefully, leaving few traces behind. Caleb's gut told him the answer was there, hidden in the tangled web of Natalie's life. For now, though, he had more questions than answers, and the weight of the town's hope pressing down on him. The investigation quickly zeroed in on a list of individuals with ties to Natalie Carter. Sheriff Caleb Morrow, accustomed to untangling the nuances of small-town relationships, found himself navigating a complex web of secrets, grudges, and half-truths. Each suspect had a connection to Natalie's life, and each carried a shadow of suspicion. The estranged husband, David Carter, had always been an imposing figure in Ridgewood. At 6 feet tall, with a muscular frame, he had a reputation for being quick-tempered. Though their marriage had ended over a year ago, David's lingering presence in Natalie's life made him an obvious person of interest. When Caleb called David in for questioning, the man arrived pale and visibly shaken. His eyes were bloodshot, and he seemed to struggle with the weight of the tragedy. "I loved my girls," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happened between Natalie and me, I'd never hurt them." Caleb leaned forward, studying him carefully. "Where were you the night of the murders?" "I was at home," David replied, "alone, fell asleep on the couch watching TV." "No one can confirm that?" David's jaw tightened. "No." The lack of an alibi wasn't his only problem. When Caleb pressed further, David's defensiveness began to crack. He admitted he and Natalie had argued recently over child custody arrangements. "She was trying to limit my visitation," he confessed, his fists clenching. "I was angry, sure, but I'd never—" He trailed off, shaking his head. A search of David's home yielded no physical evidence linking him to the crime, but Caleb's instincts told him the man was holding something back. When asked about the argument neighbors overheard days before the murders, David denied being involved. "I haven't been near that house in weeks," he insisted. But his body language, averted eyes, the twitch of his jaw, suggested otherwise. The ex-boyfriend Ethan Grady was another name that quickly surfaced during the investigation. Natalie's brief relationship with Ethan after her divorce had ended on sour terms. Reports of his obsessive behavior and uninvited visits to her home painted a disturbing picture. When deputies located Ethan at his job on a construction site, they noticed fresh scratches on his forearms. Confronted with this, Ethan brushed them off. "Workplace hazards," he said with a smirk. "You think I killed her?" Caleb met him in the interrogation room later that evening. Ethan, with his cocky demeanor and piercing gaze, exuded a dangerous mix of arrogance and hostility. "Natalie and I had our problems," he admitted. "She thought she was too good for me. But that doesn't mean I'd kill her." "Where were you the night of the murders?" Caleb asked. "At Joe's bar," Ethan replied confidently. "Ask anyone there." Caleb did, and while patrons at the bar confirmed Ethan's presence earlier in the evening, none could account for his whereabouts after 10 p.m. The scratches, combined with his past behavior, made Caleb uneasy. Furthermore, a witness claimed to have seen Ethan's truck parked near the Carter house 2 weeks before the murders. Ethan denied the allegation, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the man's story. The mysterious stranger. As Caleb worked through the leads, reports of a suspicious man seen near the Carter home on the night of the murders gained traction. Described as a tall, scruffy individual in his 30s, the stranger was reportedly seen pacing the sidewalk and smoking a cigarette before disappearing into the night. Tracking him down proved challenging, but Caleb's deputies eventually located the man sleeping in a derelict car near the town's edge. His name was Marcus Heller, a drifter with no fixed address and a criminal record that included petty theft and trespassing. "Why were you near the Carter house that night?" Caleb asked during their interview. Marcus shrugged, his demeanor nonchalant. "Just passing through. Needed a place to crash." "Did you see or hear anything unusual?" Marcus hesitated before shaking his head. "Nope. Didn't even know anyone lived there." Despite his casual attitude, Marcus's story didn't sit right with Caleb. A check of his belongings revealed a pack of cigarettes matching the brand found at the crime scene. When pressed about this, Marcus became defensive. "So what if I was smoking nearby?" "That doesn't make me a killer." Caleb wasn't convinced. While Marcus's transient lifestyle made him an easy target for suspicion, his connection to the murders remained tenuous. Still, Caleb added his name to the growing list of people to watch. The jealous friend. Perhaps the most surprising suspect was someone from Natalie's inner circle, her close friend, Madison Hale. The two women had been inseparable for years, but a falling out several weeks before the murders raised eyebrows. When Caleb brought Madison in for questioning, she appeared calm but oddly detached. She avoided direct eye contact and kept her answers short. "I hadn't seen Natalie much lately," she said, her tone dismissive. "Why not?" Caleb pressed. Madison hesitated. "We had a disagreement, nothing major." Further probing revealed that the disagreement stemmed from Natalie distancing herself after Madison made an inappropriate comment about her parenting. "She overreacted," Madison said with a forced smile. "I tried to make amends, but she wouldn't listen." Witnesses contradicted her account, however. One neighbor recalled hearing Madison yelling at Natalie on her front lawn 2 weeks before the murders. "She seemed unhinged," the neighbor had reported. Adding to the suspicion was Madison's behavior at Natalie's funeral. She seemed overly emotional, yet some attendees noted her tears felt more performative than genuine. When Caleb gently mentioned this, Madison bristled. "You think I had something to do with this?" she snapped. "Natalie was my friend." But Madison's inability to account for her whereabouts on the night of the murders, paired with her erratic behavior, kept her squarely on Caleb's radar. The web tightens. As Caleb sifted through the interviews and evidence, he couldn't ignore the troubling connections between the suspects. David's anger over custody, Ethan's obsessive tendencies, Marcus's suspicious presence, and Madison's jealousy all painted a picture of a crime rooted in personal vendettas. Yet no single suspect stood out as the obvious killer. Each had a plausible motive and glaring inconsistencies in their stories, but none could definitively place themselves at the Carter house that fateful night. Caleb leaned back in his chair late one evening, the case files spread before him. The weight of the town's expectations pressed heavily on him, but so did the faces of Natalie and her daughters. He knew that somewhere within this web of lies and half-truths, the answer was waiting to be uncovered. The sheriff's personal struggles. Sheriff Caleb Morrow sat alone in his dimly lit office, the faint hum of the desk lamp the only sound breaking the silence. The stack of files before him felt heavier than their physical weight, their pages filled with unanswered questions and dead ends. The murders of Natalie Carter and her daughters had rocked Ridgewood to its core, and the townsfolk now looked to Caleb for answers. Each passing day without a breakthrough felt like a failure, not just to the victims, but to the entire community. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion and frustration gnawing at him. Sleep had become a luxury he could no longer afford. His days were consumed by chasing leads, and his nights were plagued by the haunting images of Natalie, Emily, and Sophie. He couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of responsibility. For Caleb, this case wasn't just about justice, it was personal. He had known Natalie since she was a teenager, watched her daughters grow up, and seen the way they lit up the town with their innocence and joy. To let their killer walk free would be an unforgivable betrayal of everything he stood for. A haunting failure. The weight of the current case was compounded by the ghosts of Caleb's past. Nearly 2 decades earlier, when Caleb was still a deputy, Ridgewood had been shaken by another brutal murder, the death of a young woman named Lily Harper. Like Natalie, Lily had been a well-loved member of the community. Her murder had been equally shocking and equally unsolved. Caleb's mind often drifted back to that case. He had been young and eager, shadowing the then-sheriff as they worked tirelessly to find Lily's killer. They had pored over evidence, interviewed every possible suspect, and followed countless leads, only to hit a dead end at every turn. The case had eventually gone cold, leaving a permanent scar on Ridgewood and on Caleb himself. Sitting in his office now, Caleb could still hear Lily's mother's voice, broken and trembling, as she begged for answers. He had seen that same pain in the faces of Natalie's family just days ago, and it ignited a fire within him. He wouldn't let history repeat itself, not this time. But that determination came at a cost. The toll at home. At home, Caleb's wife, Laura, had grown increasingly worried. For weeks she had watched as the case consumed him, pulling him further away from her and their teenage son, Daniel. Family dinners had become a rarity, and when Caleb was home, his mind was always elsewhere. One evening, Laura confronted him as he sat at the kitchen table, poring over his notes for what felt like the 100th time. "Caleb, you're not eating. You're not sleeping. When was the last time you even spoke to Daniel?" Caleb didn't look up. "I'll make it up to him once this case is solved." Laura's voice softened, though the worry was still evident. "This case is tearing you apart. I know it's important, but you're only human. You can't carry the weight of the whole town on your shoulders." Finally, Caleb met her gaze, and for a brief moment, the weariness in his eyes was replaced by something deeper, guilt. "I can't let this one go, Laura, not like Lily Harper." Laura reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "That wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" Caleb shot back, his voice cracking. "I should have done more back then. I should have found her killer. And now, Natalie and her girls, if I fail them too, I don't know how I'll live with myself." Laura sighed, pulling her hand back. She wanted to comfort him, but his walls were up, impenetrable. "Just don't forget that you still have a family here, Caleb. Don't let this case take you away from us." As she left the room, Caleb stared at the empty table. He knew she was right. He could feel his family slipping away, but the thought of stepping back from the case felt like a betrayal to Natalie and her daughters. The pressure mounts. The pressure from the community only added to Caleb's internal struggle. Every trip to the grocery store, every walk through the town square, brought hushed whispers and lingering stares. Some offered words of encouragement, while others asked questions he couldn't answer. "When are you going to catch him, Sheriff? Do you have any leads?" The worst were the accusations from those who had lost faith. "You're not working fast enough, Caleb. You let Natalie down." He tried to block out the noise, but their words found cracks in his armor, feeding his doubts. What if he wasn't good enough? What if the killer slipped through his fingers, just as Lily's had, fueling his resolve? One night, as Caleb sat in his office, he pulled out an old case file, the one labeled Harper, Lily. He hadn't opened it in years, but now he flipped through its faded pages, the familiar details rushing back. The photographs, the reports, the interviews, it all felt painfully familiar. This time would be different, he told himself. He was no longer the young, inexperienced deputy he had been back then. He had the tools, the experience, and the determination to see this case through. Caleb closed the file and returned to his notes on the Carter case. He focused on the suspects, analyzing their stories, looking for holes. He reviewed the physical evidence again and again, hoping something he'd overlooked would reveal itself. The clock ticked past midnight, but Caleb didn't notice. He was too consumed by the need to find justice for Natalie, for Emily, for Sophie, and perhaps even for himself. As the night stretched on, one thing became clear. Caleb wasn't just fighting to solve the case. He was fighting to redeem himself, to prove that he could protect the people of Ridgewood when it mattered most. But with each passing day, the line between justice and obsession blurred further, threatening to cost him everything he held dear. Unearthing hidden evidence. Sheriff Caleb Morrow returned to the Carter home as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. The house stood as it had since the night of the murders, eerily still, a stark reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. Despite the forensic team's thorough search, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something had been overlooked. He stepped through the front door, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath his boots echoing in the silence. With a flashlight in hand, Caleb began his methodical sweep, retracing every step he had taken the first night. The garden's clue. The garden, a patch of neatly trimmed grass and flower beds, had seemed unremarkable during the initial investigation. But as Caleb crouched near the edge of the back porch, his flashlight caught something, a faint impression in the soil near the hydrangeas. He leaned closer, careful not to disturb it. A shoe print, barely visible. The size suggested it belonged to an adult, and the tread pattern was distinct, unlike any shoe owned by Natalie or her daughters. Caleb marked the area for collection, a rush of adrenaline surging through him. This was the first physical clue suggesting how the killer might have entered the home undetected. The diary's secrets. Inside the house, Caleb turned his attention to the girls' bedrooms. The eldest daughter, Emily, had been 14, an age filled with secrets and emotions. Her room was a typical teenager's sanctuary, filled with posters, books, and scattered papers. Among the clutter, Caleb's eyes fell on a small, spiral-bound notebook tucked beneath a pile of schoolwork on her desk. It was decorated with stickers and bore her name on the cover. A diary. Flipping through the pages, Caleb found the usual musings of a teenage girl, notes about school, friendships, and dreams. But as he delved deeper, the entries took a darker turn. Dad's been angry again. Mom tries to hide it, but I can hear their arguments late at night. I wish he'd just leave us alone for good. That creepy guy Mom dated keeps calling her. She says she blocked him, but I saw his name on her phone yesterday. Why doesn't she tell the sheriff? I heard Mom crying after she talked to Madison. She said she was done with her lies, but I don't know what she meant. Why does everyone have to fight all the time? Each entry painted a picture of turmoil, strained relationships, unwanted attention, and fractured trust. Caleb's heart sank as he pieced together the conflicts Natalie had faced, conflicts that could have pushed someone to murder. A forensic breakthrough. The next morning, Caleb brought the shoe print and diary to the attention of his team. Meanwhile, the forensics lab reported a potential breakthrough. Tests on the youngest daughter, Sophie's, clothing had revealed a faint trace of DNA that didn't match anyone in the Carter household. The sample wasn't a complete profile, but it was enough to generate a list of possible matches when compared against criminal databases. The results were chilling. The DNA showed a familial link to someone already in Ridgewood. Adding to the revelation, the forensics team found a partial fingerprint on the shattered vase near the living room floor. The vase had been dismissed as incidental, perhaps broken in the struggle, but the print told a different story. Cross-referencing the print against the suspect pool narrowed the field considerably. Caleb's suspects now included individuals with both motive and opportunity. The drifter's link. As Caleb sifted through the mounting evidence, another clue surfaced, this time from an unexpected source. A deputy had been reviewing security footage from businesses near the Carter home, focusing on the night of the murders. One particular clip from a gas station caught Caleb's attention. It showed Marcus Heller, the drifter, pulling into the lot in his rusty sedan, around 10 p.m. He bought cigarettes, exchanged a few words with the cashier, and drove off. The timestamp placed Marcus near the crime scene within hours of the murders, contradicting his claim that he was just passing through. More damning was the route he appeared to take on the footage, heading directly toward the Carter residence. Piecing it together, Caleb sat at his desk late that night, staring at the growing pile of evidence. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was far from complete. The shoe print suggested a stealthy approach through the garden, bypassing the front door. It implied the killer had some knowledge of the property, possibly someone familiar with the family. The diary added layers of motive: a volatile ex-husband, a stalker ex-boyfriend, a jealous friend, all with reasons to harbor resentment or anger toward Natalie. The DNA and fingerprint evidence pointed to individuals with physical ties to the scene. While not conclusive, they helped narrow Caleb's focus on the suspects. Finally, the gas station footage placed Marcus Heller near the scene, his previous denials now undermined by hard evidence. Despite the progress, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, a final piece that would connect all the dots. With the weight of the town's hopes on his shoulders, he resolved to dig deeper, knowing the killer was closer than ever to being unmasked. As Caleb prepared for the next day's interviews and searches, he felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since the investigation began, he could see the faint outlines of the truth. But with each new revelation, the danger of confronting the killer grew more real. Caleb would need to tread carefully, for both his own safety and that of the people he was determined to protect. Tensions escalate. The air in the Ridgewood Sheriff's office was thick with unease. Sheriff Caleb Morrow paced the interrogation room, his mind churning as he prepared to confront his suspects. The pressure from the town was mounting, and the threats against him had grown bolder. But Caleb knew he couldn't stop, not when he was so close to unearthing the truth. The estranged husband's admission. First up was Richard Carter, Natalie's ex-husband. Caleb watched him carefully as he sat across the table, his shoulders slumped and his eyes bloodshot. "I didn't kill them, Sheriff," Richard muttered, his voice cracking. "I know I wasn't a good husband, but I'd never hurt Natalie or my girls." "Then why were you near the house that night?" Caleb asked, leaning forward. Richard hesitated, his fingers drumming against the table. I wanted to see them. I've been trying to make things right with Natalie. I thought maybe we could talk." "Did you go inside?" Caleb's voice was steady, but his gaze was piercing. "Number, I swear." "I parked down the street, but when I saw the lights go out, I left. I didn't want to cause a scene." Caleb noted the tremor in Richard's hands. His story had elements of truth, but something about his demeanor suggested there was more he wasn't saying. The ex-boyfriend's hostility. Next was Tyler Green, Natalie's former partner. From the moment he was brought in, Tyler's attitude was combative. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his glare fixed on Caleb. "This is bullshit," Tyler spat. "You're wasting your time. I didn't do anything." "Then explain the scratches on your arms," Caleb said calmly. Tyler sneered. "I already told you, they're from work." "Funny," Caleb replied, "because I spoke to your supervisor. He said you've been off the job for weeks." Tyler's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Caleb pressed on. "And what about the phone calls to Natalie? You kept contacting her even after she blocked you. Sounds like someone who couldn't let go." Tyler slammed his fists on the table. "I loved her. I didn't hurt her." But Caleb saw the fear in his eyes, a flicker of guilt that hinted at secrets yet untold. The drifter's lies. Marcus Heller, the drifter, was already in custody for unrelated theft charges. Caleb knew this was his chance to push harder. "Your car was spotted near the Carter house that night," Caleb said, sliding a photo across the table. "You lied when you said you were miles away." Marcus shrugged, his expression blank. "So what if I was there? I didn't do nothing to them." "Then why change your story?" Caleb countered. Marcus hesitated, his tough exterior cracking. "Fine. I was there, I heard yelling, but I didn't stick around. Thought it was just some family drama." Caleb's instincts told him Marcus knew more than he was letting on. The inconsistencies in his story painted a picture of someone desperate to stay out of the spotlight, mounting pressure. As the interrogations unfolded, Caleb felt the weight of the town's impatience bearing down on him. Angry voices in town hall meetings accused him of dragging his feet. Anonymous letters, some threatening, began arriving at the station, warning him to drop the case. One note, scrawled in messy handwriting, read, "Stop digging, Sheriff. You won't like what you find." The threats only fueled Caleb's resolve, but the tension was undeniable. The community was growing restless, and with each passing day the killer remained free. Caleb knew he was running out of time. Every lead, every lie, brought him closer to the truth. But the closer he got, the more dangerous the pursuit became. The breakthrough Sheriff Caleb Morrow sat in his office, the evidence board before him, a chaotic web of photos, notes, and red string connecting key elements. The interrogations had added new layers to the puzzle, but the case still felt maddeningly out of reach. Yet, as he sifted through the details again, the pieces began to align in ways he hadn't anticipated. Building the timeline. Caleb revisited the timeline of events on the night of the murders, combining forensic findings with witness accounts. The gas station footage placed Marcus Heller's car near the Carter house shortly before 10 p.m. Around the same time, a neighbor reported faint sounds of arguing but had dismissed it as routine family disputes. The medical examiner's report pinned the time of death between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. That meant the killer had struck swiftly, likely leaving the scene before midnight. Then there was the faint smell of cigarette smoke in the house, a detail that nagged at Caleb. None of the Carters smoked, but Marcus had purchased cigarettes at the gas station. Could he have been inside the house that night? But something about Marcus didn't sit right. His inconsistencies suggested he was hiding something, but Caleb doubted he had the intelligence or motive to carry out such a calculated crime. The chilling realization. As Caleb reviewed Emily Carter's diary again, one entry jumped out. "Mom was so mad at Madison the other day. She said she wouldn't let her ruin us." Madison, the so-called jealous friend, had already raised Caleb's suspicions. Her erratic behavior during questioning had hinted at guilt, but until now, her motive had been unclear. The key lay in a seemingly minor detail, a phone record linking Madison to Tyler Green, Natalie's ex-boyfriend. A series of calls between the two stood out, all made in the weeks leading up to the murders. Caleb's mind raced. What if Madison wasn't just a jealous friend? What if she and Tyler had conspired together? Tyler had a clear motive. His obsession with Natalie had turned toxic, and her rejection had enraged him. Madison, meanwhile, harbored her own grudges, stemming from her fallout with Natalie. Together, they had motive, opportunity, and now a connection. Unraveling the conspiracy. The pieces began falling into place. Tyler's scratches could have come from a struggle with Natalie. Madison's cryptic comments about things getting out of hand now seemed like veiled admissions. Even Marcus Heller's presence fit. He had likely been used as a scapegoat, his suspicious nature making him the perfect distraction. But the most chilling revelation was the planning. This crime wasn't impulsive. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded act designed to settle personal vendettas while leaving the authorities chasing shadows. Caleb stepped back from the board, his pulse racing. He had uncovered the truth. This was no random act of violence. It was a conspiracy born of anger, jealousy, and desperation. Now, all he needed was the proof to bring Madison and Tyler to justice. But if they had gone to such lengths to plan the murders, Caleb knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. The endgame was approaching, and it would be more dangerous than ever. The climax. The killer revealed. The town of Ridgewood seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Sheriff Caleb Morrow had spent the past few days laying the groundwork for a dangerous plan. The evidence he'd gathered pointed unmistakably to Madison, the jealous friend, as the mastermind behind the murders. Her connection to Tyler Green had sealed it. She had manipulated him into acting as her accomplice, playing on his obsession with Natalie. But proof alone wasn't enough. Caleb needed a confession, and he knew Madison wasn't the type to give herself up easily. The trap is set. In the early hours of the evening, Caleb called Madison to the station, under the pretense of clarifying details from her initial statement. At the same time, Tyler was brought in, separately, under suspicion of violating a restraining order Natalie had previously filed against him. Unbeknownst to both, Caleb had planned for their paths to cross. He hoped the sight of Tyler, combined with subtle prodding, would crack Madison's facade. Madison arrived, her demeanor calm but guarded. "You wanted to see me, Sheriff?" she asked, her tone laced with feigned innocence. Caleb nodded, offering a seat. "Just a few more questions. Thanks for coming in." As the conversation began, Caleb kept his tone neutral, asking harmless questions about her relationship with Natalie. Madison answered smoothly, her story rehearsed and polished. But then Caleb shifted gears. "Madison," he said, leaning forward, "we've uncovered some new evidence. Surveillance footage places Tyler near the Carter house the night of the murders, and phone records show you two were in contact shortly before that." For the first time, Madison's mask slipped. Her hand trembled slightly, and she quickly folded her arms to hide it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice colder now. Before Caleb could press further, a deputy walked into the room, intentionally loud. "Sheriff, Tyler's asking for a lawyer. Says Madison told him everything would be fine if he stayed quiet." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Madison's face turned pale, her composure cracking as she shot up from her chair. "That's a lie," she shouted. "He's just trying to drag me into this." But Caleb remained calm. "Why would he say that, Madison? Why would he name you?" The standoff Caleb's calculated pressure worked. Madison's denial grew more frantic, her words tumbling over one another as she tried to justify her actions. "He was obsessed with her," she spat. "All I did was—" She froze mid-sentence, realizing she'd said too much. Caleb seized the moment. "All you did was what? Manipulate him into killing Natalie? Plan the entire thing because you couldn't stand being in her shadow?" Madison's eyes darted to the door, her body tense as if preparing to bolt. Caleb moved subtly, blocking her path, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. "I didn't kill them," she screamed. "It was Tyler. He said he wanted to make her pay, and I just gave him an opportunity." Her words were a confession wrapped in desperation. Caleb felt a pang of sorrow but didn't let it show. At that moment, Tyler, who had been listening from the next room, erupted in a fit of rage. "You used me," he shouted, his voice muffled but clear. "You said we'd be together after this." The deputy restrained Tyler as he fought to break free, confirming everything Caleb had suspected. The arrest Madison, cornered and exposed, lunged for Caleb in a last-ditch effort to escape. He sidestepped her attack, pinning her arms behind her back as she screamed and thrashed. "It's over, Madison," Caleb said, his voice firm but calm. "You're under arrest for the murders of Natalie Carter and her daughters." As the cuffs clicked into place, Madison's fight drained from her, replaced by cold silence. Tyler, too, was charged as an accomplice, his face a mask of anger and betrayal as he was led away. The case that had torn Ridgewood apart had finally reached its dramatic conclusion. But as Caleb stood in the quiet aftermath, he couldn't shake the weight of what had been lost, a family, a community's innocence, and a piece of himself. Still, justice had been served, and for Caleb, that was enough. Aftermath and reflection. The town of Ridgewood, once a symbol of quiet serenity, bore the scars of the tragedy that had shaken it to its core. The arrests of Madison and Tyler brought a measure of closure, but the wounds they had inflicted ran deep. As Sheriff Caleb Morrow walked the streets, he noticed the subdued conversations, the wary glances, and the way children clung a little tighter to their parents. Trust, once abundant in the close-knit community, had become a fragile thing. The toll on the sheriff. In the solitude of his office, Caleb allowed himself a moment to breathe. The case had consumed him, testing his resolve and pushing him to the brink. The memories of Natalie and her daughters haunted him, bright smiles now extinguished by senseless cruelty. He thought of the sleepless nights, the threats, and the constant pressure to deliver justice. Yet the cost had been personal as well. His wife, Lauren, had stood by him, even as he unintentionally pushed her away. Sitting at his desk, Caleb sifted through the final report, his hands lingering on a photograph of the Carter family. He thought of the lives lost and the question that lingered in his mind. Had he done enough? The town begins to heal. The community came together in small ways to begin the healing process. Vigils were held in memory of Natalie and her daughters, and a mural was painted near the school as a tribute to their lives. Yet Caleb knew that the shadow of the case would linger. People whispered about Madison's betrayal, about how jealousy and obsession had driven her to orchestrate such horror. Some wondered if Tyler had been more than just a pawn in her scheme. And others still speculated, were there more people involved? Reconciliation and renewal. At home, Caleb found Lauren waiting for him in the living room, her face soft with understanding. "It's over now?" she said, her voice gentle. "Not entirely," Caleb admitted, "but I'm done letting it consume me." They talked late into the night, more openly than they had in months. He promised to be present, to prioritize the life they had built together, and to cherish the family he still had. A lingering mystery. As the case file was closed and Ridgewood tried to move forward, one question nagged at Caleb. Had Madison acted alone? Tyler's outbursts hinted at others involved, yet the evidence hadn't confirmed it. For now, Ridgewood's peace was restored, but Caleb knew better than to ignore the faint whispers of unfinished business. He vowed to remain vigilant, knowing that in the shadows, the truth often hid its most dangerous secrets. Thank you for watching and staying with us. For more of these stories, do subscribe to our channel, share, and comment where you are watching from. See you in our next video.